This episode is sponsored by BioLogos. If you're a Christian with a science-loving teenager in your life, you've probably noticed how hard it is to find resources that take the Bible and science seriously. You need to check out the new Integrate curriculum from BioLogos. Integrate was designed and vetted by scientists, Bible scholars, and educators to help high schoolers see how science and faith can work hand in hand. Now through August 31st, use the code SUMMER50 at checkout to get 50% off your order at biologos.org/integrate. That's biologos.org/integrate.
Welcome to the Holy Post. Following the attempted assassination of Donald Trump, some are saying that God saved his life for a divine purpose. Today we discuss the selective use of Christian rhetoric surrounding the former president. Then multiple speakers at the Republican convention used anti-immigrant language that's often associated with the Heritage Americans movement. We examine what the movement is and its link to the 1920s. Then I welcome Reverend Dr. Munther Isaac, the pastor of the Evangelical Lutheran Christmas Church in Bethlehem, to talk about the Palestinian Christian community in the Holy Land. Then I welcome Reverend Dr. Munther Isaac, the pastor of the Evangelical Lutheran Christmas Church in Bethlehem, to talk about the Palestinian Christian community in the Holy Land. As always, we have new content this week exclusively for Holy Post Plus subscribers, including my interview with New Testament scholar Gary Burge about why popular evangelical theology about the modern state of Israel contradicts the Bible. And we have new episodes of Getting Schooled by Caitlin Chess. So join the Holy Post community and get access to an incredible library of content by joining Holy Post Plus. You can find out how at holypost.com today. All right, here is episode 627.
Hey there, welcome back to the Holy Post Podcast. I'm Phil Vischer. I'm here with Caitlin Chess. Hi, Caitlin.
Hi, Phil.
And Sky Jitani. Hi, Sky.
Hello.
Hi, Sky. Sky is in the new office. It looks like he is in an old private investigator's office with the wood slat blinds behind him.
It does kind of look like
Yeah,
that.
if we could change my camera to black and white, it could look like a film noir scene.
Yeah. Yeah, we need high contrast lighting to go with it. And and you need to be smoking. Everyone's smoking all the time. No. This could be like the Holy Post newspaper office with everyone, sitting around typing. Type. But they chain smoked constantly. Type, smoke. Hey, press. Okay, that would be awesome, wouldn't it?
It'd be very awesome.
And let's stop doing a podcast and just do a printed daily newspaper.
Those are
the name
fits
fits
so well right now.
Holy Post. It works.
Exactly. Okay. Everybody can vote on that if you want us to stop doing the podcast and just start putting out a daily printed newspaper, only available on paper. Only.
Oh.
A broadsheet. Okay. So come to the site and tell us what you think about that idea. Okay, now it's time for the theme song. What's the news that you like the most? Who's your favorite podcast host? If it's breakfast, get your toast. It's Sky and Phil and the Holy Post. Sky and Phil and the Holy Post.
And sometimes Caitlin.
This episode of The Holy Post is sponsored by Hiya Health. Hey, do you have kids? Do you care about their health? Of course you do. Most kids' vitamins are basically candy in disguise, filled with 2 teaspoons of sugar, unhealthy chemicals, and other gummy junk kids really shouldn't be eating. That's why Hiya was created, the pediatrician-approved, super-powered, chewable vitamin for kids. 0 sugar, 0 gummy junk, yet they taste great and are perfect for picky eaters. Hiya fills in the most common gaps in modern children's diets to provide the full body nourishment our kids need with a yummy taste they love. And we've worked out a special deal with Hiya for their best-selling children's vitamin. Receive 50% off your first order. To claim this deal, you need to go to hiyahealth.com/holypost. This deal is not available on their regular website. Go to hiyahealth.com/holypost and get your kids the full body nourishment they need to grow into healthy adults. And thanks to Hiya Health for sponsoring this episode. The Holy Post is sponsored by the Fresh Pressed Olive Oil Club. The prophet Elisha once performed a miracle to help a widow who was in a terrible situation. She needed more olive oil. Lots of us are trying to eat healthy, and a healthy diet includes great olive oil. You need to know about TJ Robinson, a guy who makes farm fresh, award-winning olive oil and sells it direct to you. TJ's olive oil is incredibly delicious on salads, veggies, pasta, meat, fish, you name it. As an introduction to his Fresh Pressed Olive Oil Club, TJ is willing to send you a full-size $39 bottle of one of the world's finest artisanal olive oils, fresh from the new harvest, for just $1 to help him cover shipping. And there's no commitment to buy anything now or ever. Sure, it's great if a prophet comes to your house and gives you free olive oil from heaven, but that's probably not going to happen. TJ's Fresh Pressed Olive Oil Club might be the next best thing. Get your free $39 bottle for just $1 shipping and taste the difference freshness makes. Go to getfreshholypost.com. That's getfreshholypost.com for a free bottle and pay just $1 shipping. Hey Phil, how's Lisa? Lisa's doing okay. Just finished her second week of treatment up at Mayo Clinic. I just got back. I was up there over the weekend, and she's doing okay. Starting to get tired. Some of the symptoms of cancer treatment are setting in. So she's a little, but she's doing okay. Thanks for your prayers. I'll go back up there in a couple days, and we'll see how we're doing. What else is going on in the world? Caitlin, Sky, anything? I have to say,
Chill days.
It kind of feels like we're living in historic times, doesn't it? Like things are happening that people will read about in the future.
I have felt that way for like the last 5 years.
Oh, okay.
Or maybe longer. I don't know.
Yeah, we do. It does feel like we're in a transition point. I don't know if it's a tipping point or a pivot, a historical pivot. So in the last week, we're still recovering from the Trump assassination attempt, which now has turned him into a somewhat messianic figure in American life. We also went through the Republican National Convention, which was quite interesting and included, which I did not predict, Hulk Hogan ripping his shirt in the middle of a speech. So that's fun after Kid Rock rapped about former President Trump. And then President Biden dropped out of the race and endorsed Kamala Harris to run. And now everything, the best, I think the political phrase for this is, it upset the apple cart. And now everyone is scrambling. Everyone is, what do we do now? What do we do now? Like in 1 week, we went from completely excited Republicans and completely demoralized Democrats to completely excited Democrats and somewhat confused Republicans for other reasons that I'll get into in a little bit.
Yeah, but don't you think this was kind of baked in 3 weeks ago after the debate? I never thought Biden was going to stay in.
Caitlin disagrees strongly with you.
I was surprised. I mean, I wasn't surprised at when the last few days that they had been saying Sunday he's going to announce it, but I think it was touch and go for a few weeks there of like how set in is Biden going to be?
Right.
I think was possible for it to go either way.
It's like when the family decides you have to take Grandpa's keys away. He can't drive anymore. What? It is exactly like that. I mean, it's like someone has to tell Grandpa he can't drive anymore. And Grandpa doesn't like that idea. Grandpa does not like the idea that he shouldn't be driving. And we had to do that with my grandpa.
Well, and I think
do you know why we had to do it with my grandpa? Can I tell you why? Because he was out driving one day and he woke up with his car inside an Amish cabin by the side of the road. Oh. There was a little place that built Amish cabins and gazebos for sale, and they had 4 or 5.
It wasn't an Amish cabin being used by the Amish.
It wasn't. There was no one in it. It was a cabin built in an Amish style that was on display next to the road, and he woke up with his car inside it.
And no one was injured.
No one was injured, not him. And no Amish were harmed for the making of this lesson. Messianic Trump. Caitlin was on NPR, National Public Radio. That's how you know when you've arrived, is when you're interviewed by NPR to talk about what's going on with Christians and Donald Trump. So let me just give you some quotes about Donald Trump and his assassination attempt from the last, week. Donald Trump said about his own survival, "It was God alone who prevented the unthinkable from happening. We will not fear, but instead remain resilient in our faith and defiant in the face of wickedness." Okay, he's sounding very religious. Vivek Ramaswamy said...
Vivek.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay.
Hey, we Indian Americans are having our moment. Give it to me for a second,
okay.
right?
Vivek Ramaswamy said, "I personally believe that God intervened today." I guess on the day of the assassination attempt. Tim Scott said, "If you didn't believe in miracles before Saturday, you better be believing right now," because obviously it was a miracle. Franklin Graham said, "God spared Donald Trump's life." Ben Carson saw Donald Trump stand back up after the attempt and immediately thought of the book of Isaiah and the passage, "No weapon formed against you shall prosper." So that's cool. Pastor Robert Jeffress of First Baptist Church of Dallas, the mother church of the SBC, said, "What happened was a demonstration of the power of the Almighty God. What happened was inexplicable apart from God. God spared him for the purpose of calling our nation back to its Judeo-Christian foundation." Because we know when things happen in the world, it's God trying to tell us something. Trump also said, in describing it, did you see him tell the whole story of the event in his acceptance speech? That was pretty dramatic and exciting. He said, "I felt very safe because I had God on my side." Jason Jimenez, writing for the Christian Post, said, "I can't honestly tell you all the reasons why God providentially intervened to spare Trump's life, but it's clear that he did. When God intervenes in such a public way, it's usually his way of telling or reminding us he is in charge and he's using certain people to advance his purposes on earth." Okay. Nothing messianic about that. Robert Jeffress also said, "Some Christians see the assassination attempt against Mr. Trump as divine intervention that could allow the former president to, quote, return our nation to its Judeo-Christian foundation." So there you go.
Okay, can we talk now about this?
Yeah, you can.
Have you seen this stuff? This is the one that actually I thought was the most insane.
What?
Have you seen the people online saying that apparently the bullet was fired at 6:11 p.m.?
Yes.
Which means
you go to the book of Ephesians. That's what that means. You don't go anywhere else. You go to the book of Ephesians and you look at Ephesians 6:11, which is put on the full armor of God.
Right. Which, okay. First of all, those verses are not about actual armor and they're not about actual weapons or bullets. It's about faith and love and hope.
Yeah, his faith was his armor. Yeah. His faith was his armor.
Okay.
Against the real bullet.
Why not Genesis 6:11, which says, "Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight and full of violence"? That works. Or how about this one? If you use the military clock or the 24-hour clock, it was actually 1811, right? Job 18:11, talking about evil people. Terrors startle him on every side and dog his every step. Or, there's multiple others. But here's the piece that I really want to talk about.
Okay.
And I know you will be excited to talk about this too, both of you.
Totally.
We all know that there's like the prophecy people out there, the YouTube prophets and all the people who with the red string on the bulletin board types that are trying to connect all events and what's going on. But what's really remarkable to me is none of them are referencing the most obvious biblical passage. Yes, Caitlin, we have to go there. And it's Revelation 13, verse 3.
Yeah, he was killed with a head wound.
The beast who has a head wound that's supposed to be fatal but survives and then goes on to deceive the world. Like, why is no one making that connection
I've
to
seen
the
'em.
events.
I've seen lots of them.
I haven't, at least not from the prophecy supporting MAGA people.
No. But I've seen Christians.
I made it to my wife while sitting on the couch a few days ago.
Yeah, but like that seems like if
Famous
it,
Christian,
let's just say,
Phil Vischer. You heard it here first.
if this had been Biden or Harris or some other Democratic candidate who survived a near assassination attempt by only getting the top of their ear shot off
with a head wound,
I guarantee this would be like the headline on all of those online prophets sites and YouTube videos. But it's buried in this case because they don't like the implication.
Okay. Well, Caitlin, you were on NPR. What did you say? What did they want to know? What were they curious about? And how did you enlighten them in a dazzling fashion?
I think the only part of our interview that was included was me saying, I think the biggest problem with this is not whether or not Trump is chosen by God. That's inscrutable to us for the most part. What matters is what it means to be chosen. And there's nothing in scripture that leads us to think being chosen by God automatically means you win elections or you get material prosperity or you're protected from physical harm. Usually, actually, what it means to be chosen, especially by leaders in the Old Testament, is you are held to a higher standard and you will be judged if you fail to meet that standard. So chosenness should not fill us with like victorious, triumphalist energy. It should frighten us a little bit or sober us at least to say, are we upholding the standards of what it means to follow what God has asked people to do? But I also think it's important to say that the first thing Trump said actually after the assassination attempt was that maybe it was God or maybe it was luck. It wasn't until later that that was the first thing he said was maybe God,
fight,
maybe luck in the first interview that he did with the New York Post. So that's just an interesting shift from like maybe God, maybe luck to, other people are saying it. Of course, it was God. But the other thing that's so bizarre to me in the list that you read, Phil, because I've heard different ones than the ones that you read, but it had not occurred to me until just now hearing you say this, how much this like intervention or intervened is part of it, which is a bizarre way for us to talk about this. Like, I think all Christians can say God is sovereign over all things. And so in a certain sense, God allows, or depending on your theological persuasion, like is involved in to some degree everything that happens. But the idea that God is just like sitting up there waiting to pop into human history and do things and then is uninvolved in the rest of everything else is a view of God that I don't think is consistent with the theology of most of the people saying it. Most of them would say God is sovereign over all things, and it doesn't mean God approves of all things that happens, but it does mean that God is ultimately in control. And this intervene thing is so selective, to Skye's point. Like, when do you actually say, well, that wasn't the normal progression of things, that was God intervening? I think in this case, it's the kind of strangeness of it was so close. It barely was not actually going into his head. But that, it doesn't necessarily point any more or less than any other event. If the shot had gotten nowhere close to him, that would have been the same level of God's sovereignty over all things. The idea that God just chooses particular moments to care about humans and intervene and change things is a view of God's sovereignty and human will and their relationship that's foreign to most of the history of Christian thought about it.
There's this bizarre idea that only rare or unexpected events are God's intervention, whereas true Christian theology would say the most ordinary thing in the world is for the sun to rise every day. And yet we would all say it is God and his power that causes the sun to rise every day, even though it's ordinary and expected. And we just look at the same people who are saying God intervened to make Donald Trump the president in 2016 will deny that God made Barack Obama president in 2008 or Biden in 2020. So you pick the things that you want God's mandate to back and you insert that theology there, but you take it away from anything you don't want God to endorse. So it's a Rorschach test again, and people are looking at that assassination attempt and they're going, oh, it's God. And the other thing that's really sad about this is if you say, well, God spared Donald Trump's life, then you would have to say God wanted Corey, I forget his last name. Compatore, wanted him dead. And that's a terrible thing to say. I think the more faithful response should be, I don't know what God is doing in all of this, but I am thankful that Donald Trump's life was spared, and I grieve that that other man's life was taken. That's a faithful response. To say more is to impose your own view that is unfaithful. Here's
my question. And I think that God works in human history. if someone survives an assassination attempt, how do you know when to chalk it up to God and when not to? Ronald Reagan survived an assassination attempt. Teddy Roosevelt survived an assassination attempt. Also, segregationist Governor George Wallace survived an assassination attempt. Pornography empire builder Larry Flynt survived an assassination attempt. And Adolf Hitler survived several. So you say, well, that wasn't God, because so we've decided that Donald Trump is doing God's will, and therefore God wanted him. And Jimenez says that explicitly. This is how God shows who he has chosen to specifically advance his will. And I'm just wondering, what is God's will that we think Donald Trump will advance, particularly given that we've also found out over the last week to 2 weeks that he's steered the Republican Party away from being explicitly pro-life, away from being explicitly in favor of traditional marriage. And this is where it starts to get really wild, that he's now standing up in rallies and saying that the Project 2025 is radical rightist. They're radical leftists, but they're also radical rightists. And these guys are so extreme, and I don't even know who they are, except 140 of them that worked on it were in his administration by one count. So he seems to be pushing away from much of what conservative Christians wanted him to push toward, and at the same time saying he's doing God's will, and that's why God intervened to keep him alive. And I'm confused.
Obviously, I don't think we can definitively say why God does a lot of things, but actually, there's another verse that I looked up which falls into the 611 framework, in this case, 1811, when you use the military clock. Listen to this one, because I think it answers your question, Phil. Jeremiah 18:11. The Lord says, "Look, I am preparing a disaster for you and devising a plan against you. So turn from your evil ways, each one of you, and reform your ways and your actions." I think if what you see in Donald Trump or any of those near assassination attempts that you mentioned, if you see a person who afterwards repents, changes the direction of their life, turns toward God, exhibits gratitude, mercy, forgiveness, love, patience, goodness, all that fruit of the Spirit, if you see that begin to develop in their life in response to their life being spared, then I think you could say, wow, in sparing this person's life, God brought good fruit out of them, transformed them, led them to repentance. That, you could argue, God did something good from what could have been a tragedy in this person's life. But I don't think you just look at, well, I wonder what policy they're going to push through Congress in 2025 that would explain why God spared their life. You just can't make those kinds of connections. And until we see that kind of character fruit coming from Donald Trump, I don't think we could say anything about why this happened or why it didn't.
Yeah, Caitlin, you want to add any more to that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a connection here between our desperate searching for God's will more broadly in our world and the way that we often place that burden on individuals of like, I have to discern God's will for my life means there are 20 career paths or marriage paths or where I live paths that are in front of me, and I have to pick the right one or I'm wrong. Lots of it, to Skye's point, especially on a broad scale for a country or for the world, is not knowable to us. We're finite humans and we're fallen, and we make mistakes all the time when we're trying to discern where the Spirit is moving. And that question about where the Spirit is moving in our political life is an important question for us to try to discern as individuals and in communities, but with such great humility that we may be wrong, that we very often are wrong. On the other hand, we can say in response to all of this, to Skye's point about fruit of the Spirit, some things about God's will are quite clear, revealed in his word. Just even going to the Sermon on the Mount. Okay, what's clear is that it is God's will for us to pray, for us to give in secret to the poor, for us not to murder people, for us not to commit adultery, for us to love our enemies. So in those ways, that's true on both an individual level and a political level, to say, I can't know if God has chosen this person to lead my country. I can know what things God has revealed in God's word matter to God about how human communities function. And to the best of my ability, I can vote with those things in mind. Similarly for myself, I may not know exactly what God's will is for my career, for my marriage, for where I live. I can know that God has said that this is what it means for us to live faithfully. And by the power of the Spirit, with the help of my community, try my best to do those things. But there reaches a point where it is not only unknowable to us, but for us to be confident in our pronouncements of it is not only to be confident about things we can't really know, but is often to harm other people, right? Especially for Christian leaders, some of these prophets that have lots of people listening to them, for you to say with such confidence what God wills for us as a country that is outside of what God has revealed in God's word to us is to coerce people by saying, "Thus saith the Lord," when you really can't know if God has said that.
Okay. Moving forward a couple days, the Republican National Convention.
Just a couple days.
Just a couple days, because this is thick. We're living in we're thick history right here. There's no time to talk about news of the butt or animal news, because we're in thick history.
Finally, something to be happy about.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much, Caitlin. Former President Trump's acceptance speech at the convention was quite interesting. It started out, he said it was going to be unifying, and that he threw out his speech that was going to attack old, sleepy Joe Biden, and he was going to do something to bring the country together. And it started out kind of interesting, very low energy, very sleepy, but, not throwing punches at anyone. And then it kind of went off the rails. And after, 45 minutes or to an hour, I couldn't watch anymore, partly because he was making so many false statements. And secondly, because he was using false statements very often to demonize illegal immigrants over and over again. He said that illegal immigrants are responsible for the rising violent crime rates of our major cities, when violent crime rates are actually declining, not rising. He said, and I've now seen other people pick this up, illegal immigrants are why housing prices are going up and people can't afford housing anymore, because we're all competing with the people that come across the border with no money and no ability to secure housing. And that's why my house is so expensive. So it was just false statement after false statement designed to demonize a group of people that have very little ability to speak for themselves, and to scare people into thinking, you do need a stronger leader. You don't want Sleepy Joe. You need a strong man. And then he has, of course, Hulk Hogan and the CEO of Ultimate Fighting come out to introduce him to testify as to how strong he is, because this is what you need. You need a strong man. Just recently, he complimented President Xi of China for, in Trump's words, ruling 1.4 billion people with an iron fist, and said that Joe Biden was just not capable of that, assuming that Trump says, I am capable of that.
Yeah. He also said, didn't he say that undocumented or illegal immigrants are taking 107% of jobs?
Of new jobs.
Of new jobs.
Yes, 107% of new jobs.
It's not even mathematically possible.
No, that some jobs, they're taking them twice. And we don't know because they're illegal. They do it illegally. But you're not supposed to take a job twice, but then they get twice as much money, and then they spend it on really nice houses that now I can't afford.
Take more than 100% of anything.
If you're illegal, you can, because you don't care about the laws of math.
I mean, it's so obvious he's just pulling stuff out of his orange butt, and it's not logical.
Hey, I said we're not talking about butts today. Come on, man. Right. People are going to pull that clip and use it to make me look bad. He also said that illegal immigrants were killing hundreds of thousands of Americans. Mm-hmm. That was a thing that he said. Again, we've had a huge influx of illegal immigrants over the last 5 years. Violent crime rates have gone down. So it is very easy. And that's what so frustrates me so much is when someone says things that are easily falsified, easily disputed, and yet the audience goes nuts and applauds and passes them around. I don't know what to do with this. I know that there are things about the Democratic platform that I do not like, But I don't know what to do with someone who's demonizing people who have very little to try to get authoritarian power because he's made people so frightened.
Okay, but here's my question for both of you. And that is, we could sit here and talk all day long about all the crazy stuff that Donald Trump says. The more interesting question is, why, at least up until Joe Biden dropped out of the race, why is he winning? Why are Americans ready to re-elect such a person to the most powerful office in the world when he is this demonstrably broken and flawed?
Because we're scared and we're angry. That's why the far right is rising in France. It's why the far right is rising in other parts of Europe. That's when you feel insecure, when you feel like things are changing in ways you don't like. I mean, half of Americans believe we need a strong leader that's willing to bend the rules a little to, quote, bring America back to what it's supposed to be, which apparently is a little more.
I don't have the data in front of me. We had Elizabeth Newman on a few weeks ago, and she's an expert in domestic terrorism. And the statistics show that a huge percentage of Americans, and I don't think it's more than 50%, but an uncomfortably large number of Americans believe that political violence is justifiable to get what they want. So it's just striking to me. You're right, Phil. We are living in this moment with rising desire for authoritarian leadership. We are ready to throw away civil rights. We're ready to throw away the constitutional order. We're ready to throw away democracy and equal rights so that I can win. And no one's thinking far enough down the road to realize that even if you win in the short term, throwing away all of those cherished American values will someday boomerang back upon you. And that's incredibly dangerous.
Caitlin.
I also think I was really struck recently. I think it was the New York Times Daily podcast talking to people at the convention. I might be wrong about that, but I think it was that podcast where they were asking people about some of the kind of most undemocratic claims that Trump has made. And they talked to some folks who were at the convention. So these are like politically engaged people. These aren't even majority of people who might vote for Trump, who are not probably pretty politically engaged. There's data on this, that of the more politically engaged people are more likely at the time to vote for Biden. Less politically engaged people, which is a larger subset of the population, Trump was winning them, people who are just not paying attention. But these are people who are paying a lot of attention. And when asked about some of the really undemocratic things that Trump has said they didn't think he would really do it. And I think part of what's going on here for the really politically engaged, maybe, but definitely for the people who are really not politically engaged, who probably agree with that guy. Oh, he wouldn't do some of that crazy stuff that he said he's going to do. Part of what's gone on is this all feels so exhausting. It feels so overwhelming. I've been doing some research the last few days. Every time that someone on either party has said either there's an existential threat at stake here, or our country will be lost, or democracy is on the ballot, when you start hearing from both sides, especially the side that you might be inclined to vote for, that level of threat constantly, and you're not paying attention to all the particulars because you're just not someone who's that politically involved, it can start to just feel like I'm checking out entirely. I heard this from people at my church all the time. Like, I just cannot be bothered to be engaged. It's overwhelming. It feels so scary. And kind of like there's data behind this with climate change. When people hear enough of a huge threat that feels so outside of their realm of everyday life, it stops even mattering to them. Like, they don't register it as a serious threat. And then I think what happens is people who might regularly vote Republican, or people who do have the fear and the anger, even just a little bit of it, and so Trump is more appealing, but a lot of them are not fully bought in. They're just like, I'm not going to pay attention anymore. I'm too exhausted. And I think what a lot of us who are really politically involved and in churches should do is figure out how to get, I know I'm like beating a dead horse with this, but figuring out a way for people to get involved in politics at a local level on actual issues, in something that they feel like they have agency and they can affect some change in the community that they belong to. Because right now, people are checking out of everything, even places they could have some real good, because at the national level, it just feels like if I hear one more time that the world is going to end, I just can't be involved in this anymore. I'm too exhausted. My emotional energy is gone. My nerves are fried. And I think a lot of those folks are folks that are voting for Trump.
Yes. Scott?
Well, I obviously agree 100% with you, Caitlin, but the part I can't get around is even for people who are politically disengaged, who don't follow what's going on from week to week and watch the horse race. I actually admire those people. A lot of those same people are ones that would consider themselves very patriotic, who love this country, who love the history of this country, who love the Constitution, who believe that America, and I wouldn't necessarily agree with this, certainly not theologically, but believe America has a special place in God's work and in the history of the world. Those same people, I want to say to them, don't you realize how the candidate you are backing is undermining the stuff you say you love? Like, he's undermining the equal branches of government. He's undermining the Constitution. He's undermining the founders and what they fought for. He's undermining what we have built as a society. He's undermining free and fair elections. He's an authoritarian who admires authoritarians. And so it's just so weird to me that the very people holding up the Constitution and the flag and American history and all that are advocating for somebody who is the counter to all of those things, and they don't see it. And I'm like, you either have to be not just politically disengaged, but completely historically unengaged to understand what's going on here. And to Phil's point, I think what's appealing is they see the world and the country as a dangerous and threatening place. And here comes this Hulk Hogan-like strongman who says, I will fix it and I will keep you safe and I will stick it to the people you don't like. I think that's his appeal. But they don't recognize how that is exactly what the founders of this country were fighting against.
Okay.
It's just bizarre to me.
There was another theme that popped up the last night of the Republican National Convention that is worth mentioning. Did you see the 97-year-old, was he 97 or 87? I forget. Very old, I think it was 87, the veteran, World War II veteran that spoke in support of Trump. And he said at one point, he said, America is not an idea. America is my home. Ironically, that same line then popped up in J.D. Vance's speech, so it was the night before, almost verbatim. In J.D. Vance's pre-written remarks was the same line. America is not an idea. America is our home. No one fights for an idea, which of course is patently false. People fight for their home. And some people I saw online just saying, well, yeah, of course, America is a nation. It's not just an idea. That's not exactly what is going on in that statement. What's going on in that statement, because I've heard that for months on far-right Twitter, is that this notion of a propositional nation is a post-World War II invention that has ruined America. And we need to go back to the idea of America as a specific group of people on a specific land. Right. That American heritage, and there's a new phrase that's bouncing around called Heritage Americans. Are you a Heritage American? And that means you are from an Anglo-Saxon Protestant tradition, that your heritage here, you weren't an immigrant, you were a settler. You were a settler and a founder. And America was really supposed to be for that group of people, mostly Anglo-Saxon Protestants, who settled and founded America. And things started to go off track when we let other people come who were not settlers, who just showed up as immigrants. So, the 1920s strong anti-immigrant backlash, this was really, we want to recapture Heritage America, which was, before the Eastern Europeans and the Catholics started coming. We didn't really want Catholics here, and we really didn't want Eastern Europeans either. So let's try to go back to what? Heritage Americans, the purebreds. And that's popping up again. And it's popping up in Christian circles too. So the fact that it started popping up in the Republican National Convention, I found as very interesting, that it's going to be one of the themes of this election. And there's a whole lot of Christian enthusiasm for that idea, because obviously, these people are bringing other religions and other beliefs, and they don't have our work ethic, and they don't have our sense of community. And that's what we need, why we need Trump to kick them all out.
Okay.
Caitlin. Caitlin's dying to say something. Okay. I'm going with Caitlin first.
Well, I almost said this earlier, and now I'm glad I didn't because it fits here better, is, again, there are lots of things about God's will we cannot know. We cannot know if he's chosen a specific person to be a leader. We can't always know even like political movements or ideas, like what is the spirit behind? We can't know that. We can know, because it's one of the clearest themes, especially in the Old Testament, is that nations, including nations that are not Israel, they're not specifically chosen by God, are judged most explicitly and most often by how they treat foreigners. That doesn't necessarily translate into a specific U.S. policy. There are legitimate debates to be had about how we embody that claim. But if we are going to be interested in discerning what God's will is for our country, we should start with what is most explicit in Scripture God's will is for all nations, which is you treat foreigners well. That is a mark of a good nation. And in this case, it's not just a question of policy. It's a question of the words that we use, the ideas that we have. Because what concerns me about everything you're saying, Phil, is not just the way it will work out in policy. That concerns me. What concerns me is the people who are marginally interested in politics, but start to little drip by little drip pick that stuff up. And yes, it might influence how they vote. But what concerns me so much more is the ideas that they learn to have about their actual neighbors in the place that they live. I live in a city that has a lot of immigrants, people who are trying who have refugee status or are trying to achieve refugee status, immigrants who are here documented and undocumented. And what worries me about that language is not just that people in my community will vote for Donald Trump because they're scared. What worries me is that they were a little bit scared, they were a little uncertain, which makes sense for humans who are confronted with something new to them. But then that fear is nurtured by people with really wayward interests to the point where it bubbles up into their communities, the people that they run into at the grocery store, the people they live next door to. And that's where we can say God's will is clear on that. It's ambiguous in other things, and we can't be sure, but we can be pretty sure about this.
I did an explainer video about this topic last year. Was it last year? Yeah, last year. Mm-hmm. We should put it in the show notes. What's happening right now on this whole issue of immigration, as you said, Phil, it looks almost exactly like what happened 100 years ago in the 1920s. There was this massive influx of immigrants, Jewish, Catholic, Southern European, Eastern European, and it resulted in the rise of eugenics, this very racist pseudoscience that said, certain races were superior to others. It led to the resurgence of the Ku Klux Klan in the 1920s. It led to immigration laws to ban people who weren't from Northern Europe from coming into the United States. And it led to a horrible season in American history where we did terrible things as a country to those that were considered outsiders. And it's happening again. And so let's not beat around the bush. What this language of heritage Americans is, this language of America not being an idea, but a home for only certain people, it's just racism. It is flat out racism. And when you go back and you look at that sentimental sort of make America great again rhetoric, a lot of people are pointing to the Cold War era. They're looking at Ronald Reagan. They're looking at John Kennedy. They're looking at that. And that was an era in which America was seen as a creed, because the idea was there are values that are American that we want to see exported around the world, like human rights, democracy, classical liberalism, freedom of speech, freedom of thought, freedom of religion, those ideas that made this country great, we wanted to see inculcated around the world in contrast to authoritarianism and communism and all those others, those competing ideologies. But now we're on the other side of the Cold War. And just like in the 1920s, people are going, oh, but I actually just want this country for me. So America's not an idea anymore. It's a nation for white European people who've been here for a long time, and that's it. And it's always in eras like that that America does its worst work. And it's in eras when we are competing around the world to take our best ideas and advance them around the world that America's its best self. It was in that era that we passed civil rights legislation because we knew that segregation and racism was a bad look for America globally, so we reformed it. And it doesn't make sense to me that the same people these folks deify, like Ronald Reagan, they are rejecting his ideology and rhetoric in favor of flat out racist ideology. And that's sad to me. It's profoundly sad. And it's only going to get worse now that Kamala Harris is likely the nominee from the Democrats, because she's the product of immigrants. And I thought it was really interesting at the convention when they zoomed in on J.D. Vance's wife, Usha Vance, because she's Indian American. She looked so uncomfortable as that rhetoric was going out, because she represents the complete opposite of what her own husband is saying from the platform. And I don't know how you hold that together, but it's and there's a lot of rhetoric about her now and how upset they are with J.D. Vance being the nominee because his wife is the child of immigrants, and he's the one spouting all this nationalist, white supremacist dog whistle stuff.
When she said, because she spoke, and when she said that her husband, J.D. Vance, had even learned how to cook Indian food for her and to eat vegetarian. It's like, oh, wow, there goes a big part.
And you've seen the pictures of their Hindu wedding?
No, my big fat Hindu wedding. Last thing I want to say. Okay, so Kamala Harris is picking a vice presidential candidate to go on the ticket with her, of course. Is there a chance? Now, the Republican Party has done some really wild things, like put the head of the Teamsters Union on stage at a Republican National Convention to give a speech and say pro-union things and kind of pull back from some kind of reshape to try to be a little more populist and a little more working man. The Democratic Party has also gone away from being populist and working man in the last 20, 30 years, and much more a professional, highly educated party that caters to the needs and desires of professional, highly educated people. Is there a chance that Kamala Harris and her team sees what's happening and pulls back more towards the middle to try to recapture some of that appeal to, honestly, red state working class Americans who've typically been reliable Democratic voters, but are defecting in large numbers because they see the Democratic Party as being elitist. So could this inspire a course correction for the Democratic Party where they become less elitist? Yes or no? Caitlin?
Anything is possible. I mean, I feel like a few people were relieved when Biden stepped down, not necessarily because, I mean, some people were relieved because they thought there was no way he could win / would not be a good president because of his age. But also, I think a few people were just like, I'm glad some things are maybe going to get shaken up. Like, I'm glad that maybe there can actually be conversations about what is the best, not just strategy to beat Trump, but also person who can lead the country well. And I do think it represents an opportunity for Democrats to rethink, like you said, who they're engaging. Also, though, I think a lot of panicked decisions are being made because of how late it is in the election. So I'm not particularly optimistic that like the most calm, thoughtful heads will persist.
Yeah, one line of commentary that I thought was interesting about Harris is that she was known in California as a tough on crime prosecutor, an attorney general. Then she ran on the ticket in 2020, George Floyd era. And being a tough on crime prosecutor was not something you wanted to campaign on. So she had to kind of ignore her own story to campaign, in that new era of should we be defunding the police and are we mistrusting, of authority and is tough on crime something that is entirely Republican and Democrats don't want anything to do with it. It may be that now she's free to actually run as herself and say, you know what, I was a tough on crime prosecutor and I can be tough on crime when I need to. And if she's actually in a better position by being in a different political moment, maybe. Scott, you with me?
Well, I think by picking J.D. Vance, Trump has doubled down on sort of the Christian nationalist MAGA brand. And that leaves an opportunity, an opening for the Democrats to say, we are the big tent party. We are inclusive. We are broad. If they pick somebody who's just going to reinforce we are super progressive social elites, that's bad. I think they need to pick somebody who says we're big ticket. I think one person who would do that is Andy Beshear, who's the Democratic governor of Kentucky. Very, very moderate. I mean, he's in Kentucky, for goodness sake, but he's a Democrat. Or maybe Mark Kelly from Arizona, former astronaut, Gabby Gifford's husband. She was a congresswoman who was shot in the head, 10 some years ago. Also more moderate in his views. So I think if they can find somebody who communicates, Kamala Harris, she's California. She's a woman of color. She speaks strongly for women's rights and things like that. She's seen as very progressive. But if they can get a very moderate, red state, white guy as the other half of the ticket, I think it would communicate to the country that we're a big tent. There's room for diversity of thought in our party in the way that there isn't in Donald Trump's party. But we'll see what they do.
Well, the Republican Party had Amber Rose on stage, so there seems to be quite a bit of room for diversity of thought and action and dress code. Okay. Hey, everybody. Hope this was helpful. I hope we're not driving you crazy, but we are in a historic season, thick with history, and we're going to talk about it and then try to figure out, which we didn't really get into today, what can the church do to help, to make it better, not make it worse? Maybe we'll pick that up next week. Caitlin, do you think we could pick that up next week? Can you?
Please.
Can you put some thoughts together? You have 7 days to put some thoughts together about how the church can make this better, not worse.
It probably will involve hanging out with kids.
Okay, see you next week. Thanks, guys. Bye. The Holy Post is sponsored by Faithful Counseling. I'm not super good at people stuff. I like ideas and technology and puppets. When Lisa and I got married, it was a shock to see just how different we approach the world and each other. The thoughtful gift of marriage counseling from one of our parents was a huge help in those early years. Faithful Counseling can help you get through life's rough spots with more than 3,000 licensed therapists across all 50 states. Faithful Counseling makes it easy to find a great therapist that'll work for you. You can meet over video or phone sessions, and changing therapists is easy and free until you find the right fit. So don't struggle alone. Let Faithful Counseling match you with a licensed therapist who can help you grow into the best version of yourself. Visit faithfulcounseling.com/holypost and get the professional, faith-based counseling you need. And there's a special offer for our listeners. Right now, you can get 10% off your first month at faithfulcounseling.com/holypost. Thanks again to Faithful Counseling for sponsoring this episode.
Back in May, I took a trip to Israel and the West Bank. I know that going to the Holy Land during a war isn't normally the way it's done, but I'm really glad I did. I met some incredible people, I heard some incredibly painful stories, and I came back both inspired and incensed by the situation there. Part of my trip included attending the Christ at the Checkpoint conference at Bethlehem Bible College. Bethlehem, if you didn't know, is in the occupied West Bank. It's a Palestinian city and home to thousands of Palestinian Christians. My guest today is one of them. Reverend Dr. Munther Isaac is a pastor and theologian. He leads the Evangelical Lutheran Christmas Church in Bethlehem. He's also the academic dean of Bethlehem Bible College. He's an outspoken advocate for the Palestinian Christian community, and I asked him to come on the show because the only thing most American Christians know about Palestinians is what they see in the news. And most know nothing at all about the ancient Palestinian Christians caught in the middle of the ongoing war in Gaza. Here is my conversation with Munther Isaac. Dr. Munther Isaac, welcome to the Holy Post.
Thank you for having me.
A lot of American Christians are completely unfamiliar with the fact that there is a sizable Palestinian Christian community. Can you just begin by sharing a little bit about what the Palestinian Christian community looks like in the Holy Land?
It should be a surprise if we did not exist, because this is the land where Christianity started. I am speaking to you from Bethlehem, the place where Jesus was born. A few miles from here is Jerusalem, the place of the first church. Christians in this land have always existed. There has always been a Christian presence in this land. Our numbers differed over the time. There was a time when we were the majority. Right now, we're definitely a minority. And if I am to describe our reality today, our situation is that we are a fragmented community due to the political reality. Sadly and unfortunately, the vast majority of Palestinian Christians, and the number that people estimate is close to 500,000 Palestinian Christians worldwide. The majority of Palestinian Christians live outside of Palestine. They are forced to live outside of Palestine. They cannot return. They are either refugees or people who are denied the right to visit or be in their homeland due to Israeli restrictions on Palestinians. So, like, the majority of Palestinians, many of us are forced to live outside. In the land itself, in Palestine and Israel, there is close to 180,000. And even this community is very much fragmented. Some live in the West Bank, like myself, under both a Palestinian Authority self-rule, but a military Israeli occupation that occupies every aspect of our lives. Some of us live in East Jerusalem, some live in what is now Israel, holders of Israeli passport, and some are in Gaza today. There are still Christians in Gaza, even as we speak, in the midst of this ruthless war of genocide. So, as I said, we're fragmented, we're one community, we're all Arabs, Palestinians, united not just in spirit, but in our national identity, but fragmented into different political realities.
And share a little bit about what the impact of the current war in Gaza has been, obviously for the Christians in Gaza, but then for you in the West Bank. Because a lot of us we hear about some of the awful stories coming out of Gaza, but we hear very little about what life is like for Palestinians and the Palestinian Christians in the West Bank. So can you tell us about both of those since October 7th?
To begin, about the people in Gaza and Christians in Gaza, like all Palestinians, are going through hell. It's a very, very brutal war. The images we see and the stories we hear are brutal. One of the shocking things to us as Palestinians about this war, about the nature of this war, is that it's being broadcasted live for the whole world to see. Every day we see dead bodies under the rubble. We see people shot in the streets. Every day we see children in hospitals. Right now, the images of starvation are the most brutal one. Children who are almost like a skeleton without anybody. It's really traumatic. And the stories are horror stories of people, being bombed, killed by snipers, even dying from dehydration, lack of medicine, lack of food, sleepless nights for almost 10 months now. It's really impossible to describe what the people of Gaza are going through, including the Christian community. Maybe what's different about the Christian community is that the vast majority of them, close to 900, at the very first week of the war, all took refuge in one of the two churches, the Orthodox or Catholic churches, thinking that this war will end soon, but it didn't. And because the majority of Christians live in the city of Gaza, right now Gaza is destroyed, completely destroyed. Their homes are destroyed, so they are homeless for sure, refugees within the church, facing the unknown, because the big question is what happens after this war is over. If they survive, we hope they survive, we pray they survive. And I say that because even in the two churches, they were shot and killed. One church was bombed, the others was hit by snipers. So Christians died within the two churches, one through bombing and one by snipers. So if they survive, and we hope they survive, they don't know what they're going to do. Their homes are destroyed. It's hard to describe to what they're telling us. Living on 2 loaves of bread a day or so on, prioritizing giving their children food, and then the parents start. It's really hard. It's really hard to describe. Some have left. Very few have left. They were able to leave through Rafah, either because they have dual citizenship or because they were able to pay Egyptian authorities a very high sum of money in order to be allowed to leave to Egypt. There are sadly those who benefit from war. Let's just call it for what it is. A couple of hundred were able to leave Gaza, escape, go either to Egypt or Australia or other countries. Australia gave visas quickly, but close to 700 are still in Gaza today. Here in the West Bank, we live in a state of anxiety and fear. And I'm not even talking about the restrictions, the checkpoints, and the fear from the violence of the settlers. I say anxiety because many have friends and relatives in Gaza. We want them to survive. Fear because we know this could happen in the West Bank anytime. If the world was okay with the killing of right now 16,000 children in Gaza, will anybody move if this happens in Bethlehem or in Nablus or in Jenin? And the state of affairs where most Christians live in Bethlehem actually is very sad because we depend on tourism. And if we are not, if there is no tourism, there is pretty much nothing. And then many of us also work in Jerusalem. But now Jerusalem is closed. We are not able to go to Jerusalem, which is literally 15 minutes drive from here. There is a high number of unemployment. And those who survived COVID and the closure in COVID were not able to survive this crisis. And sadly, many, many families left. Many Palestinian families and Palestinian Christian families.
When I was in Bethlehem in May, it was heartbreaking just walking through the streets and realizing that so many of these shops and restaurants are desperate for anyone to come in. And even the Church of the Nativity was virtually empty because there's no tourism. And like you said, the government has closed the checkpoints, so Palestinians are unable, who work in Israel, are unable to work. So the economic situation is destitute. There's also violence occurring in the West Bank, which we don't hear as much about from the settler community. Can you describe how Israeli settlers are using the war that's currently happening, or the backlash since October 7th, as an opportunity to try to persecute more Palestinians and take more land?
Well, and let's be clear, it's not just the settlers, it's the army as well. It's both the settlers and the army. And before October 7th of last year, this was 2023, the most violent year to date in terms of numbers of Palestinians killed in the West Bank. This is what people are not getting in the news, that Palestinians being killed, whether in the refugee camps in Jenin or in Balata and Nablus, or even here in Bethlehem in Tuhisha camp, has become a daily routine. Hundreds have been killed before October 7th. Thousands are arrested without trial. And this has been happening for years, but for sure since the last Israeli government took over in January of 2023, we've seen an increasing number in settlers attacks. And the reason, it's not that all of a sudden settlers decided we want to attack more Palestinians or grab more land, but because now they have the backing of their government. A government that is formed of very extreme voices who at a certain point were considered terrorists by their own Israeli government. Yet now they are in power. I want people to understand that. Some were convicted, but now they are in power. And their priority as a government was that one of their priorities, the increase of settlements. The government was formed under a coalition that stated Jews and only Jews have an exclusive right to all the land of Israel, as they call it, meaning all the land. In other words, we don't exist to them, and it's their desire to push us out when they say such a thing. In terms of land annexed, 2024 has seen an incredible increase of land confiscated and annexed, Palestinian land, because everyone is paying attention to what's happening in Gaza. All under, again, the cover of the Israeli military. You have to understand, even for us Palestinians, going from one Palestinian town to the other within the West Bank is a risky endeavor itself. Not only the checkpoints delay us constantly, where sometimes you wait for no reason for 1 hour or so, you are afraid of settler violence. And again, these settlers are never held accountable. And now they're confiscating land. Yesterday, the Israeli Knesset voted that there will never be a Palestinian state. So Israel is clearly heading towards a one-state apartheid reality in which there is Jewish supremacy, Jewish control, and the Palestinian life is suffocated within towns like Bethlehem, Nablus, or cities and Ramallah. You've been to Bethlehem, you've seen how much suffocated we are inside the town. The wall from one side, the settlements from the other side. There is no way for us to grow naturally as a community. And the only way forward is for us to leave, because no one will bear life in such a manner. All of this is happening under the watch of the world, and maybe some are distracted by what's happening in Gaza. But meanwhile, Israel is increasing its grip over the West Bank.
So, Dr. Isaac, one of the narratives that we hear a lot in the United States about the Palestinian community is a one-dimensional view that basically equates Palestinians with Hamas or Palestinians with other militant groups. What is the Christian Palestinian community's view of those representations of Palestinians or of those groups themselves? How have Christians in Palestine reacted to Hamas and the attack on October 7th?
Well, I think it's not just a question you must ask Palestinian Christians. I think if a Muslim Palestinian listens to this, he will be troubled, because Hamas is definitely part of the Palestinian people, but they are not the majority. They are one group among many. They are the group that have chosen the path of armed resistance to the occupation, motivated by religious beliefs. But certainly they don't. Even I've heard a lot of discussions about, well, Gazans voted Hamas. I mean, anybody with a simple knowledge about what happened in 2006 at the elections would clearly know that this is not true. Hamas won 44% of the votes, I think, back then. And most analysts would tell you this was more of a vote against the secular Fatah party than it was a vote of yes towards Hamas, because people were tired of the lack of achievement of Fatah and the Palestinian Authority. Peace was promised but not delivered. Instead, we were left with the bureaucracy and some corruption as well. That was especially true back in 2006. People wanted an alternative, so many voted for Hamas. But even then, it wasn't like they won 90% or 80% of the votes. Not only that, when it comes to Gaza, for example, the majority of the people of Gaza today are youth and children. In other words, they did not vote in 2006. So this characterization is clearly meant to dehumanize or characterize Palestinians as all religious fanatics who want to destroy Israel. The other thing I wish people understand is that Palestinians don't have a problem with Jews. Our problem is with Zionism, with the state of Israel, with the occupation, with the system of apartheid. It's not about attacking Jews for being Jews. I wish people understand that. And this is why Palestinian Christians are against Israel. Palestinian Christians speak openly against Zionism because we think it's a dangerous ideology, it's a colonial ideology. And we suffer because of the policies of Zionism and what happened since the creation of the state of Israel. I want people to come and meet Palestinians and understand that Palestinians, like all peoples, are a diverse community. But what unites us, whether the religious or the secular, and we clearly, I don't know, we have many secular Palestinians who are, only religious by name, but not in practice. We have many progressive people, we have many fundamentalists. Even among Christians, it's the same. But what unites us is our rejection to Zionism and our desire to be free and independent one day.
So you make a clear differentiation between Jewish people and Zionism. I've heard you say elsewhere that the solution to anti-Semitism cannot be a blank support for Zionism. So how do you shepherd your own congregation to be critical of Zionism, but to not develop a hatred or resentment towards Jews themselves? How do you stay away from the anti-Semitism while still critiquing Zionism?
Well, to put it very, very in a very simple way, it's Jesus. I follow the teachings of Jesus. To me, Jesus is clear in his teachings about never seeking to destroy the other, but to transform the other into friends. Jesus' teachings, not naively, but strategically center around love to neighbor, even love to enemy. For Jesus knows that the logic of an eye to an eye could easily turn into the logic of one eye versus 100 eyes, and so on. I preach about this all the time, that we cannot be prisoners of hatred. In fact, I was just talking to a young Palestinian Christian today who was asking me, she's very angry and frustrated. And I said, we cannot be prisoners of this frustration and anger that we have. We have to channel it into positive action, acts of justice. Because if we're just, frustrated from something and focus on that thing will control us. I told her, if you don't like a phone, get a new phone, and don't just keep complaining about the other ones. I said, to us, it's clear, it's the teachings of Jesus that show us all are equal, that teaches us to love all and challenge even in our love the injustice of the other, and so on. So I found myself over the years, Kai, coming back more and more to the Sermon on the Mountain, to the teachings of Jesus, to the nonviolent teachings of Jesus, which characterize our thinking as Palestinian Christians, our theology, and our path as well.
One of the things I heard repeatedly, both from Israelis and Palestinians that I met with when I was there, was how important American foreign policy is to the conflict in the Holy Land. And on top of that, how critical the American Christian church is to the American policy and then what happens in Israel and the West Bank and Gaza. What is your perception of the American church in its complicity or partnership with Palestinian Christians or with Israel? What is your perception of where we are, and what would you like to see happen?
Well, to me, there is no doubt, and I've been saying it for years, the American church is part of the problem, directly part of the problem. You mentioned something about American foreign policy. Israel can't do this war right now in Gaza if it wasn't for the weapons being sent from the United States. The United States treats Israel as an extension, or as a colonial arm, if you wish, to continue its control over the Middle East. And I'm not making any conspiracy theories, or I'm not trying to make theories about, but American presidents are all clear that we support Israel because it's in the best interest of the United States to support Israel. American foreign policy is never motivated by justice or by what's right or wrong, but what makes America more successful and rich. It's very clear to us. And Israel has, over the years, enjoyed a ridiculous amount of number of American vetoes in the Security Council, which meant that they are never held accountable for breaking the international law. Take, for example, the settlements. Everybody says the settlements are illegal. Okay, so let's sanction Israel for continuing to build settlements, American veto. The weapons, the financial support. This is why Israel continues what it's doing, because they can. They're not even paying for it. Americans are helping pay the bill. They're never held accountable. And then when you consider what Christians in the States, especially among evangelicals, their position about Israel and their political lobbying to allow all of this to continue, you understand why we say Israel is the church in the West is part of the problem. Pastors in the States are openly, and very influential leaders are openly pro-Israel, openly advocate political lobbying on behalf of Israel against even withdrawal from settlements and so on. Churches have given financial support to Israeli army, to the settlements. We've seen the impact of the church, especially in the time of Trump. Trump said famously, or infamously if you want, that when he moved the American embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, that I did it for the evangelicals. And you think, for me as a Palestinian, why is the church heavily in America, heavily involved in politics and money towards a decision of such nature? I wish people understand what they're saying and what they're doing. Because here we are in a very violent, tragic conflict. And I don't even call it a conflict, but let's call it a conflict for now, in which one side's argument is the deity told us this. God gave us the land. And somehow we're okay with this. I mean, imagine if you and I fight over, I don't know, a laptop. And your argument is, God says this is my laptop. I mean, what can I say? And somehow the church in America is engaged in a dispute in the Middle East and choosing sides because they believe, and so this jump from the Bible, from the covenant with Abraham into the state of Israel today, making every Jewish person entitled and politically have political rights over against the Palestinians, even making it okay to dispose us or to expel us from the land. Not just is problematic and incomprehensible to us, it's very damaging to the credibility of the gospel. I don't know if you've seen the debates in the Congress recently about the campus protests. And one congressman challenged, I think, the president of Colombia with Genesis 12:3. And he says, do you want to be against God? Because there it says, if you bless, it's talking about Abraham, by the way, not about Israel. Somehow they make it about Israel. And, I sit here and I say, how is this acceptable in a political discourse? I can't understand it. Imagine if a Muslim congressman or woman challenged that and said, do you want to be against Allah because the Quran says this? All hell will break loose. Yet somehow this is acceptable. And as a pastor, as an evangelical pastor myself, I am troubled, even to be honest, disgusted how a promise about the blessing of Christ to the nation, to all the world. This is what Genesis 12 is about. This is what Romans tells us about Genesis, that this blessing to the nation became true in Jesus, who is the embodiment of love, who died on the cross for all. How this concept is now weaponized as a political tool. Sorry, it's really reprehensible. I can't understand it.
I have difficulty understanding it too. And honestly, I think a lot of Christians in the United States would be shocked to discover that they have Christian sisters and brothers among Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank. Not that your presence there is the only reason to reconsider the position of the church and American foreign policy, but it shows that there's a lot they don't know. And they have a very narrow understanding of this conflict and a simplified theology that plucks verses out of context. Going back to the role of your community, you've mentioned how small the Christian community really is in the West Bank and among Palestinians. But what influence do you think Palestinian Christians can have, both among other Palestinians, but in the land overall? Is there an influence that you hope you and your congregation and other Palestinian believers can have in changing the way this conflict is unfolding?
Well, first, on a global level, I think it would be a big loss if the Holy Land, the place where it all started, becomes devoid of Christians. And if pilgrims only come to see dead stones and buildings. We feel the burden of history to continue the Christian presence in the place where it all started. It's a big responsibility, but I know we have to. We have to continue the witness of good news. From Bethlehem, from Beit Zahur, the shepherd's field, is where the good news to all the world came. This must continue. Now, speaking about today, we're part of the Palestinian people. In the West Bank, we are about 1 to 2% only, between 1 and 2% of the population. But studies show the real impact, which is really shocking to many when they read the studies about the real impact of the Christian community. The 1 or 2% of the community is actually, for example, responsible for 1/3 of the health sector in the West Bank. And that includes East Jerusalem. When it comes to hospitals, clinics, we have so many schools. We have so many non-governmental organizations that are involved, like charities or development or education. In fact, at least 50% of these organizations are either church-related or church-funded. On the economical level, the church is the 3rd highest employer in the country after the Palestinian Authority and the United Nations Refugee Services. Then it's the church. So our presence is very crucial to the Palestinian people, to the survival, and then we're heavily involved in education, in culture, in art, even in the political life. Many leaders within the Palestinian Authority are Christians. So we're not a small community doing nothing or just being victimized. We're very involved. And I think we maintain the diversity among the Palestinian people, alongside the few hundreds of Samaritans, by the way. There are Samaritan Palestinians near Nablus. We feel we maintain the diversity of Palestine. You have to remember, Palestine at the time was a land in which Jews, Christians, and Muslims and Samaritans lived. And in the north, we have Druze. So it's a mixture, you know. Right now, sadly, these divisions are meant to serve as, you know, as if we're meant to fight. We're not meant to fight against one another. So again, it would be a loss to the Middle East if Christians leave, and definitely a loss to Palestine if Christians leave. And I think over the years, it's proven that we are able to bridge somehow this unfortunate gap that exists between, if you wish, the West and the East. I think of the bad image, you know, the stereotypes many in the West hold about the East. You know, think of Edward Said's Orientalism and so on. I think we somehow managed to challenge that perception. We disturb the image, the balance, you know, because somehow many are used to think of Arabs and Palestinians as Muslims, and here we come as Palestinian Christians, and just our mere presence, you know, forces people to question. So, why are we doing this? You know, is there another perspective? Is there something else? And then once we share our stories, this is when eyes begin to be opened about not just the political reality, but again, the engagement and involvement of the West and how damaging it has been to our mere existence as Palestinian Christians.
Dr. Isaac, thank you for your time today. Before I let you go, do you have any resources or where you might direct people who are listening to this conversation who want to discover more about the Palestinian Christian community? Is there a website or one of your books, especially, that you'd recommend?
2-3 years ago, I've written a book called The Other Side of the Wall, published with InterVarsity. It tells the story of Palestine through the lens of Palestinian Christians, through our experience under occupation, and our engagement with evangelical Christians mainly, but others. I've written it as an introduction or as a window, if you wish, to especially American evangelicals about life on the other side of the wall, but also faith on the other side of the wall. It's Palestinian Christian narratives of lament and hope, how we read the Bible from this side of the wall. Many have found this book extremely helpful even today with the war on Gaza. I also, you know, strongly recommend you visit our YouTube channel, Christ at the Checkpoint. Christ at the Checkpoint is a movement I lead in which we engage mainly with evangelical Christians about issues related to the theology of the land, to the end times, but also to justice and so on. There's a huge resource of a whole library of talks and discussions, YouTube channel called Christ at the Checkpoint.
Dr. Isaac, thank you so much for your time and for your leadership of the Christian community there in Bethlehem, and we wish you the best, and we'll be praying for you and for peace throughout the land. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Sky, for having me again. Thank you.
The Holy Post Podcast is a production of Holy Post Media, produced by Mike Strelo, editing by Seth Gorvet. Help us create more thoughtful Christian media by subscribing to Holy Post Plus at holypost.com/plus. Also, be sure to leave a review on Apple Podcasts so more people can discover thoughtful Christian commentary, plus ukulele and occasional butt news. Visit holypost.com for show notes, news stories, Holy Post merchandise, and much, much more.